Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, yes, they did. They absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Novolis, your host, and I am so delighted to be back with you. It is going to be a fun day. We're going to get to one of Samuel Adams' classmates, and we're going to talk about him, and we're going to talk about not Sam Adams as much, but we're going to talk about what's happening in the root of our nation. We continue to hear the issues, and we heard this week and President Trump talking about mental health and that we need to do more about mental health, and to the effect that, yeah, there were a lot of mental health institutions in the past, but for all the various reasons, those went away. I think it was partly from the mental health workers themselves, as well as the cost of maintaining the institutions, whether they were state run institutions or private institutions, because a lot of them were private institutions that closed. And as it has gone with all of the hospital systems in America and healthcare in general, that used to be all private institutions as well. Remember, we had Lutheran hospitals, we had Presbyterian, we had Jewish, we had Catholic hospitals, Methodist hospitals. Some of them have retained maybe a name, but in effect, they are all part of larger corporations. And when the corporations didn't see that they could maintain mental health, guess what? They're going to shut those programs down. And especially if they weren't getting the donations, they weren't getting individual citizen support. That's another topic for another day. But in all of that on mental health, as I've said a month or so ago, is that it's not about mental health, it's about what's going on in the churches and the fact that the increase in all of these issues is very large based on what's happened in preparing our people to be in the military and go to war, the high tempo of all of the crazy wars that we should not, and the founders would not have approved of us being involved in. Just go read George Washington's farewell address, where he tells us, stay out of foreign entanglements. I think I really like what we're doing on that and starting to back away from those foreign entanglements. It'll save us some money in the long run. But what's worse? What's absolutely worse? And we're going to talk about a Sam Adams classmate here in a while, but where I want to open us is where I will continue, not in every program, because I think you'd get tired of it, and I get tired of talking about it, although we can, because the root of our nation's development is in that book, which I promote on SamuelAdamsReturns.net, is none other than The Chaplains and Clergy of the Revolution. It was written in 1864 by J.T. Headley. And you need to read that book, or you need to watch the videos that I'm doing for my grandkids, because that is the establishment of our nation. And I gotta say, the ones that I will hammer on from time to time, because I don't want you to get bored with it, but you need to understand it, is number one, the Gospel Coalition. They are destructive to our republic. They are preaching scriptural truths to an extent, but they do not take it into the whole aspect of the scriptures. So here's something that I kind of want to share with you a little bit before we get into everything else. That is, if you go read the book of Judges, so that's been my so if you go read the book of Judges, It's been in my most recent weekly study for the last couple of weeks. Every one of those judges, except for Deborah, if you look at them closely, especially the big wow names, go to the wow names. Let's take Gideon as a wow name, and then Samson as one of the wow names in Judges. Each one was called by God. And thinking about Gideon, he even tested God to make sure that what he was being told was the right thing. Wow, testing God. Okay, well, we all do that every day anymore. And so he did, man. He went out there and did what? He listened, he got it down to the 300, and the 300 went out and they watched God work and participated in that work to drive out the enemy from Israel. All said and done, here it is. Gideon takes and even takes care of those that wouldn't help and feed his men, and that's taken care of. And then what happens at the end? What does Gideon do? Gideon takes and, give me all those earrings you guys got. Give me all that gold you captured in those battles and in those wars from those Midianites and all of that. And he builds idols. He builds a major idol. And he leads Israel from the victory that God performed to take them out of the enemy's hands for the very same thing. And Gideon leads them back into idolatry. And then you can see the rest of it. I mean, he was rather prolific. 70 sons, and each one of them is then murdered except for one. And then the murderer, which was from a concubine, boy, that takes you down a whole nother path. And then there's that Samson dude, hey, he's right from before conception, God had a plan for him. And then, hey, he does what? He takes and he loses his faith along the way. And he takes and, does he lead Israel astray? No, not necessarily, but he allows things to happen in the end run. But anyway, to that point, that's what is happening with the Gospel Coalition. They're there with some great truths, but in the end run, they're destroying the undergirding of our nation. And think of the influences. So there's a pastor here in Northeast Ohio that I always comment. I'll never say his name out loud, but you can figure him out. Minimum influence of people is 10,000. 10,000. And then what he has on TV and radio and all of that is significantly more. But he's a staunch member of the Gospel Coalition, and he talks from the pulpit against what it means to be an active citizen in our republic. So what does that bring me to? That brings me to a very interesting article that I found in the Federalist this week. I really like the Federalist. They put some really good stuff together. The article is by a gentleman named Matthew Cochran. The title of the article, which is in your references, "We Need Christian Nationalism Because Religious Neutrality Has Failed." Are you hearing that? And we're going to talk about that a little bit, and then that'll take us into Sam Adams' classmate. But what is being said here is that that's the Gospel Coalition, as well as the very leftists, the leftist churches. And I'm saying those are communist, socialist, immoral, godless churches that are out there, and a whole other organization, the liberal theology, that they put out a statement against Christian nationalism in America. Now I'm waiting for the Gospel Coalition to jump on this as well. I haven't seen that yet, but when I do, I will let you know and warn you on that. But here's this whole idea. We need Christian nationalism because religious neutrality has failed. And that's what the the Gospel Coalition is yeah, their religious neutrality when it comes to what it means to be a citizen within this republic. Okay, and I say that Christian nationalism, and nationalism has a very bad name, especially because of the leftists. But the fact is, if you go once again to SamuelAdamsReturns.net and you go up into the menu up on the top, what you will see is the reality that the chaplains and clergy of the revolution were nationalists. They were about America. They were about their colonies. They were about liberty, about freedom that comes from Christ and then is extensible. My favorite word, I don't know, maybe I made it up, but I did not. It's in the dictionary. It is the extensibility of the gospel that I talk about all the time. And that is what established this nation. Now, in this article, you'll be able to read, what it is that this liberal group, they call themselves Christians Against Christian Nationalism. And I'll tell you what, you got to read their manifesto because it is like the left wing insanity. And they use the socialist communist dialectic to perfection, and are manipulating the gospel within the context of these truths. And I say that from the point of view that we will look at who, and you should look at who, are those chaplains and clergies of the revolution and what they said, what they stood for. But in this article, it just continues to go through all of the various components of this, and that, the churches need to start standing up. They need to look at their historical perspective. They need to apply various components of truth. All right, enough on that one. Some of the other ones that we're going to quickly cover is we're going to go, and I want to mention this article. You can go look at it, and it's in your references. Yes, schools are too girly for boys, and here's how to fix it. I think that's a great article. We're also going to cover, the article you need to go read is My Son's Freshman Orientation at Virginia Tech Was Full of Leftist Propaganda. So, wow, what do we talk about in education? That's why we got all the idiots we have. And then here's one that I think is relevant to what we're going to hear about. Yes, Sam Adams' classmate, and I'll give you the name, is, yes, Reverend Langdon. We'll talk about him in the next two segments. So those that are listening on Dr. Spalding's program and network, you're going to have to get to the archives to get the second segment where I'm going to start talking about Dr. Langdon and George Whitefield. And then, yes, you're going to get what's in the third segment in that regard as well, in talking about that continuation, melding in these articles. So once again, if you're listening here on Dr. Spalding's network, you need to take and definitely go to the archives to get what I'm going to do, because it's going to happen in the second and then follow through in the third. Another article that's in the archives is Study. More students are graduating college because it's gotten easier. When we look at all of the various components within the issues of our nation, they combine in the ways of, yes, they combine from the fact that the churches aren't doing their job. They're teaching a really watered down gospel, extensible gospel, and education. Because the churches aren't doing their job, education and so many other things have actually become wishy-washy and are not from that foundational perspective of truth. I got to tell you, these are the same things that happen all through the Old Testament. So we need to learn from that. Sam Adams did. And you have to understand that he got it right as well as those anti-federalists. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. They did get it right. And I want to give thanks to one of the networks that has just been having me for a good number of years here, and that's none other than Liberty Works Radio Network. You know what? You're listening here on Liberty Works Radio Network. You need to check out those other hosts and hostesses and donate. You know, it's just important that the network is supported because it does bring programming that really isn't out there with all Salem's talking heads and all the commercialization and all of that. It's important that we have another place for liberty to be spoken of from a foundational perspective. And I'll tell you what, the daily programming and the live programming that's on during the day is really, really good. The other place that I'm extremely thankful for as well is the invitation of Dr. Spalding and onto his network and his ministry and what's going on with Soaring Eagle Radio. And you could go to soaringeagleradio.com to listen there. I'm on Saturdays at 8 p.m. It's out of Lima, Ohio, and pretty much is in that FM market there. So that's 101.1 FM. And support them as well if you can. You know, so I'm asking you to check it out. And if you're in the Lima market, please support what's going on with Dr. Spalding. And now we're going to get back to what we opened the program with, and that the what is it for the Christian nationalism? And there's a lot of things that are going on out there when we start thinking about what's happening in that whole battle of the church and the misunderstanding of what it means to take and be the Rushdoony people, the people that go after Gary North and all of that. It comes down to what's happened in education, what's happened in people always trying to relabel and make names, especially in the leftists and the godless people that are leading different churches that are part of the National Council of Churches, which came from the Federal Council of Churches, and those that are of the major denominations that want to deny that Christianity was important in the foundation of this country. Well, in the first article that I mentioned to you about on Christian nationalism, one of the points that was brought out very, very clearly in the subtitle here is that early states established churches with tax support. And what he goes through is absolutely true, and which has been destroyed by the Supreme Court and destroyed by all of the liberalism that went into schools, all of the socialism / communism that is now and has been in education since the early 1900s. Yes, the early 1900s. We saw that transition. I've talked about it before. But the First Amendment forbids the establishment of a state church in the United States at the federal level. That's all. And the lefties used that, and they used what I said was always Article 6, that the Constitution would become the supreme law of the land. And I talked about it I'm looking back, this book right here. I talk about it very, very specifically in that, yes, the articles are corrupted. And hence the Supreme Court, especially when it was packed, and there's articles out there, you can go read them, that all of these communist socialists that are running for president in the Democrat Party said that they will pack the court. They promised that they will change the Supreme Court so that they could institute, according to what I always say, the Kozak Plan, the leftism in America and destroy our moral fabric. Now, The First Amendment was designed only at the federal level. And this article does a great job in talking about that at the state level, people, I live in Ohio, and if Ohio actually wanted to take and have a state denomination, if they wanted to be Reformed Presbyterian, oh, I like that they could do that. And they could have taxpayer support for it. Because when the states were formed and the Constitution, the first Constitution in the Articles of Confederation, every state, not every state, a good number of states did exactly that. They had a state denomination, and the taxpayers supported it. Geez, isn't that interesting? Nothing wrong with it. Now we do. We absolutely do have state religions, and the federal government is in violation of the First Amendment. You know why? Because it has instituted, instantiated, stamped in, pounded in, slammed in a national religion. And that's called humanism. So that takes me now into swinging all the way over here on the magic computer, if you will. Not that it's magic, because we know all about bits and bytes and all of that. In talking about a classmate of Sam Adams. Sam Adams' classmate. Sam Adams' classmate. His name was Samuel Langdon. Samuel Langdon. Samuel Langdon hit a home run, which if you take and you read in the archives and you read in, go to samueladamsreturns.net and look at today's program, is that here's a sermon he wrote. It was called Government Corrupted by Vice. And it was written and spoken and preached in 1775. So, Tom, how does all this tie in? Well, we need to have a little history, and the reference in here in the editor's notes to that sermon, I think, is very critical. I really like a lot of the work that's done at the Belcher Foundation, and I asked Kathy the other day in a comical way. I go, "Hey, are you a Belcher?" And she goes, "What? What are you talking about? A Belcher?" She goes, "Are you know, what's wrong with you?" And, well, you take and you burp. Aren't you belching? Some people are really good at it. Others are, so. But I'm sitting here reading this and I'm going, oh, okay, what is the Belcher Foundation? That's not about a lot of people that are out there burping away, for sure. No, that's not what it is. The Belcher Foundation is actually about the first governor, well, not the first governor, but a governor during that period of time, which was Governor Johnathan Belcher, during the period of, he was around from 1682 to 1757. And he was the governor of Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and also the overseer of Harvard College. Not only that, he instituted one of those colleges down there in New Jersey. Just very interesting history about him. But the really unique part, he founded Princeton University because he was that colonial governor of New Jersey as well. And so he did take and found that. But the name Belcher is composed of an English-French word that are bell and cheer, which means good cheer. So, you know what? If you're a Belcher, you're of good cheer. But the Belcher Foundation has some extremely wonderful, historical, nailed truths that get down to what's going on from the pulpit as well. So Samuel Langdon preached a sermon during the key turning point at the beginning of the American Revolution in 1775. Langdon was an ardent patriot and graduate of Harvard in 1740, and that makes him a classmate of Samuel Adams. And in fact, we're going to talk about it a little bit here, is that it was Langdon, along with Sam Adams, at the behest of Sam Adams' sister, who was the pen pal of George Whitefield, that asked Sam, hey, why don't you write to Whitefield? He's back in England, and let's see if he can't help with the Stamp Act. Well, Langdon was the co-writer or co-signer with Sam Adams on that letter that went to none other than George Whitefield. Oh, Tom, what does this have to do with tying everything together with all of the college stuff and everything you were talking about? Well, first off, on the Christian nationalism, if you look at Langdon and him being one of those, that's at SamuelAdamsReturns.net, and the chaplains and clergy of the Revolution. He's a great patriot, ardent patriot. Wow. Let's see. Some of the comments on Langdon's ended up being the president of Harvard. Get this. Now, here's something interesting as we're getting into the last few minutes. When he was president of Harvard, here's a quote. He did not receive the respect and kindness from the students and others connected with the college that were due his character as a scholar and a Christian. Oh, wow. So it goes on here. The as a Christian comment is reminiscent of George Whitefield's experience when he sought to preach at Harvard and was allowed to do so because of Governor Belcher, who was an extremely strong Christian man that understood how the gospel should be extensible and how it should be used in governance. So it was Governor Belcher, because he was an overseer of Harvard, that pretty much persuaded Harvard to have George Whitefield come and preach there. Now, this was a turning point for Sam Adams as well, was when he heard Whitefield preach. And I talk about that in so many different ways that I'm not going to go through this in particular. But you can go read Whitefield's own words. It's a link in this reference on Governor Belcher and Harvard College. It's just incredible to read that. Langdon's statement here, by many, the gospel is corrupted into a superficial system of moral philosophy, little better than ancient Platonism, Platoism, was echoed by Whitefield's earlier statement made December 15, 1739, when, during his visit to Williamsburg, Virginia, Whitefield commented on the state of English colleges and universities such as Oxford and Cambridge. And we're not going to be able to get into this in this segment. We're going to follow up, and I'll reiterate some of this in the third segment. But let's just stop here for a minute. So here it was. We know that Christianity was the foundation of this nation. Yet at that time, already when Langdon was president of Harvard, we're finding that he did not get the due he should have had as a Christian leader. So we're seeing that the perversions of what Harvard was when he was there, and let's face it, Whitefield had a hard time coming in, but Harvard was there as that university that was to take and develop the ministers for New England and the United States. Isn't it amazing that education is always at the forefront of the spiritual battle? It's that whether it is the Gospel Coalition, it's that whether it is those that are attacking a Christian nationalism that doesn't even exist. That's what's in the article. It doesn't even exist. And then we go from there to our historical perspective and what Langdon was saying, that the gospel has turned into a superficial system of moral philosophy. We see that so much. And Samuel Adams understood that. And yes, those anti-federalists, they did as well. And they got it right in predicting this very day in 2010. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. Yes, they did. They got it right. And those on Soaring Eagle Radio, welcome back as well to this third segment. We'll give you a little recap of what happened in the second segment, but you need to go to SamuelAdamsReturns.net and go to the archives and either download the podcast or watch the video of the program. You have a choice. Isn't that great? I give you choices as to what you're going to be able to do. So in the last segment, we were talking about none other than Samuel Adams' roommate. Well, he wasn't a roommate. He was a classmate. But, it was a small crowd there during that time in 1740, and that classmate being none other than Samuel Langdon. And we haven't even gotten yet. So what we're going to try and get to right now, not right now, but hopefully we'll get to it in this last segment, is the sermon on government corrupted by vice, preached in 1775. And it was very interesting that, that sermon could be preached today if we had anybody in the gospel coalition, ha, 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 that had the intestinal fortitude. I'll stay with that upper portion of the anatomy because otherwise I want to drive it a little bit lower, especially for those so-called men in the pulpits out there in the Christian coalition. If they had the intestinal fortitude to preach this sermon alone, then their churches would be empty because they would offend somebody. Oh, well. Anyway, the great part is that it was Governor Belcher who ensured that none other than George Whitefield would come in and preach at Harvard. And it was Sam Adams and Langdon who heard Whitefield preach and made a significant difference in Sam Adams' life and how he viewed the extensibility, that whole truth of the gospel, and the fact that Governor Belcher understood that, and he was a governor that knew how to govern according to Christian principles. So I guess if you go back to the opening article on Christian nationalism, I think I'd have to look at Governor Belcher as a key example of what it means for Christian nationalists. He would be a great example for that. Yeah, check it out. Anyway, Langdon was talking about, and a little recap from the last, is that Langdon ended up as the president of Harvard. And in there, a note was made, a comment was made regarding him, in that he did not receive the respect and kindness from the students and others connected with the college that were due his character as a scholar and a Christian. Well, we see that even worse today in all of the universities. And you have to understand that Belcher also, he was very important in starting that college down there in New Jersey, yes, that Princeton place. And with that, we can see in all of the universities and colleges, based on all of those articles that I have listed in the references, that how I left the last segment is that the attacks on truth in education are nothing new. The attack on pure Christianity and the gospel and the extensibility of governance and in knowledge is nothing new. You got to remember that the religion, national religion of the day, humanism, and even in the States is a religion, humanism, is from the devil. I mean, let's just face it. That's exactly what happened in the garden. And I have to tell you, I heard Gorka this week talk about the battle that's going on right now started in the garden when man was deceived by the devil, that angel thrown out of heaven, and said that you, and I'm pointing to the camera, you out there would be as wise, as smart, and know everything as God. So that's what we have. Anyway, let's move on. Otherwise, I can go down that road. So Langdon made the statement, and here it is. By many, this is the Gospel Coalition and all of the communist leftist leaders in the National Council of Churches, by many, the gospel is corrupted into a superficial system of moral philosophy, little better than ancient Platonism, was echoed by Whitefield in his earlier statement in 1739, and it was published in his journals, Whitefield's journals. And during a visit to Williamsburg, Virginia, Whitefield commented on the state of English colleges and universities such as Oxford and Cambridge. So Whitefield said this when he was there at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, quote, "I rejoiced in seeing such a place in America. It may be of excellent use if learning Christ be made one end of their studies, and arts and science only introduced and pursued as subservient to that. For want of this, most of our English schools and universities have sunk into mere seminaries of paganism. Young men's heads are stuffed with heathen mythology, and Christ or Christianity is scarcely so much as named amongst them, so that when they come to be converted, they are obliged to undo what they have been doing for many years. Revive, O Lord, a primitive, early Christian spirit, and then we may hope for some primitive schools to be erected and encouraged amongst us." Look, I can stay on this for a long time, and in the references, there's more there that I would encourage you to read on the different essays, the works even on what was happening in the Great Awakening. There's a lot here at the Belcher Foundation, going and looking at things that were said by Jonathan Edwards. But if you look alone and compare the references that I have on all of the educational references that I mentioned in the first segment, if you go look at those, this is exactly where we are today, and worse in education. It's worse because, and look at it, men's heads are stuffed with heathen mythology, and Christ or Christianity is scarcely so much as name amongst them. That's true. And what he nailed here's Christian colleges, so-called Christian colleges, universities, and cemeteries. Oh, yeah, that's what I call them. Cemeteries that are out there. I don't care whether they're Catholic or whether they're Protestant. You know what? They are here. What he just said is that they have sunk into mere seminaries of paganism. I can give you examples of things about Multnomah College, and other places. Anyway, Whitefield, he was there in 1740. Langdon heard all of that. Whitefield had views about the right use of reason and learning reflected in the Great Awakening. Go learn more about that. So Langdon's sermon, this one sermon that I mentioned here, is none other than Government Corrupted by Vice. Is that where Langdon was going with this? Is that it was a sermon that mentions American liberty, established on the faith of royal charters. So when I speak of Sam Adams and I talk about the whole fact and reality that one of the real peeves that happened was the destruction of the royal charters, boom, it's here. So we can talk about that a little bit more. There's good references in here. You can find those references on either on SamuelAdamsReturns.net on what I've spoken about, but the Belcher Foundation has some really good stuff. So John Adams was very accurate in discussing about the Shirley junto that made government corrupted by vice in the first place. We see those articles in Samuel Cook, The True Principles of Civil Government. Read that sermon, and then it goes on. We can talk about that. So when we read about the principles of governance, of government, we have to look also at these other sermons and what they were talking about. Langdon called for limited government and the removal of corrupt government officials. You can look at what John Adams talks about on the Machiavellian Shirley, but most importantly, Langdon called for the nation to return to true principles of Christianity and morality of the Ten Commandments. It was abandoned, the abandonment of true Christianity, Langdon said, that caused the British government to be the way that it was. Well, you're going to have to read the sermon because I'm not going to read it in these last 4 minutes, but you need to go read that sermon. It's there in the references right in the top. And let's look again from what I said in the first segment is that, President Trump talked about the mental health issues in our society and that it's not the gun that did the shooting, it was the person that pulled the trigger that did the shootings that are out there, and that we need to look at more at mental health. Well, you have heard me over and over and over and over and over, and I will continue forever over, is that no, it is the lack of morality. When we took the Ten Commandments out of education, we get exactly what George Whitefield said. When we take the Ten Commandments out of business, we get the perversions that are pushed inside of businesses, in the Google, Schmoogles, Facebooks, and even in the major corporations who are now social justice warriors instead of being businesses that understand how to act from that extensibility of the gospel. When we take Christianity out of society, national Christianity, nationalism, Christian nationalism. No, it's common sense Christianity that takes and works. It just plain works. And in this republic, that's what we are allowed to have. But because the pulpits, like those in the Gospel Coalition and those leftist communist major denominations in the National Council of Churches, what we have done is we have allowed a new religion to form at the national level as well as what we have in the states, all the way down into the schools, so that we continue the dumbing down, the paganism of America, the transition from what we had and we see from Gideon, from his following God's move through the enemy and doing the cleanup work, to taking and instituting paganism at a national level. That's what we got. And what we need to clean out, and what we have here that Langdon says to clean out, is the bureaucracies. What we still have are, and I will call it what it is. I don't care whether you like it or not. What we have is evil in our bureaucracies at the national, state, and local level, because we have immoral people, or we have people that are leftist religious people in the different positions in the bureaucratic area. It's terrible. It's hard to get rid of the bureaucrats. You need to figure that out. And where you need to start the cleanup act, as I always say, is you need to go talk to your pastors and your church leaders. And if you cannot get them to preach Samuel Langdon's sermon on none other than government corrupted by vice, or any of the other sermons that are, they're just at the Belcher Foundation, then what I would suggest is you go find another church, because you can't live within the perversion, as I call it, of the gospel and the extensibility of the gospel. I guess you can, because there's tens of thousands of people that do. But Sam Adams, he didn't. Nor did the Anti-Federalists put up with that. So come on back next week as we see what else is happening in the news